Democrat on the Banking Committee, Senator Brown, for his remarks. For more than 4 decades now, this core civil rights law has helped ensure that banks that do business in our low and moderate income communities actually invest in those communities. Before the Community Reinvestment Act, or CRA as it's called, banks often avoided lending to customers and businesses in the lower income neighborhoods where they opened branches. So this practice was known as redlining, because back then, banks would draw literal red lines around communities that they did not want to lend money to. And not surprisingly, the communities that were redlined were African American, Latino, and low-income communities. In essence, they were content to take the deposits from low and moderate families, people of color, small businesses, and farms, but then they turned around and denied those very customers mortgages, loans, and other lines of credit. The Community Reinvestment Act was enacted to put an end to that redlining and spur greater investment in our minority communities and lower income neighborhoods. But even today, we're still grappling with the socioeconomic and racial consequences of this systemic financial discrimination. Many of our most impoverished neighborhoods are the same neighborhoods that were redlined decades ago. It's one of the reasons that the generational wealth of Black and brown Americans remain drastically lesser than those of their white counterparts. That's why we have to reject the Trump administration's proposed rule changes to the Community Reinvestment Act. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the OCC, that CRA new rule would result in significantly fewer loans, investments, and services to low and moderate income communities, and it would permit banks to avoid businesses and investments in these neighborhoods. In essence, it would lead to a new form of modern-day redlining, all with the federal government's blessing. It's no wonder why civil rights groups, including the NAACP, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, have fought so hard against this rule. They do not want banks to be given the green light to discriminate against minority and low-income consumers. Now, make no mistake, industry stakeholders and regulators are just as divided over the Trump administration's actions. That's why, in fact, neither the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation nor the Federal Reserve have joined in this effort. Neither of them have joined in this effort. That's why I urge our colleagues to do the right thing and repeal this harmful new CRA rule. In a year where the entrenched racial and economic disparities that have long plagued our nation have been exacerbated and on full display, the last thing we need to do is to steer money away from Black and brown families, homeowners, consumers, and businesses. As a matter of fact, in the midst of this pandemic, we can see the consequences to those communities that are often at the front line of mortgage foreclosure and losing their homes. So I urge my colleagues to join me in rejecting this new CRA rule. This is about protecting civil rights. This is about protecting economic opportunity for all. And this is about continuing to do the hard work of reversing the discrimination, the financial disparities, and the socioeconomic injustices that have plagued our nation for far too long. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senators recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to oppose the resolution vacating the OCC's final rule on the Community Reinvestment Act, or CRA. Acting Comptroller of the Currency Brian Brooks has noted, the new Community Reinvestment Act rule was finalized for one reason: to promote more lending and investment in underserved areas, including low and moderate income neighborhoods.